Canada just hit a NATO target it missed for 12 straight years, and the man who gets partial credit for forcing it there is the same man Canada is locked in a trade war with. Welcome to Flashpoint, where power shifts before the headlines catch up. For 12 years, Canada was NATO's most embarrassing underperformer. 12 years of summits, 12 years of commitments, 12 years of allies privately rolling their eyes at Ottawa's defense budgets. The 2% of GDP target, the minimum threshold NATO members agreed to in 2014, became a symbol of Canadian freeloading, a talking point Trump wielded like a weapon every time he wanted to humiliate an ally into spending more. This week, that chapter officially closed. The annual NATO spending audit confirmed what Carney campaigned on and has been racing to deliver. Canada has hit 2%. Every single one of NATO's 32 members has now reached the target. For the first time in the alliance's modern history, the spending scorecard is clean. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte made the announcement Thursday. Every member of the 32-country alliance reached the spending target. It was a moment the alliance has been working toward for over a decade. But the details of the audit tell a more complicated story, one that is simultaneously a genuine achievement for Carney and a reminder of exactly how much ground Canada still has to cover. Canada sits at the bottom of the rankings, dead last, tied with Belgium, Albania, Spain, and Portugal, all sitting at exactly 2%, the minimum. The floor. Not a position of strength, but a position of just made it. Meanwhile, Poland is spending 4.3% of GDP on defense. Lithuania is at 4.0%. Denmark, the same Denmark that Trump threatened to destabilize by demanding the annexation of Greenland, is outspending the United States at 3.34%. The U.S. itself sits at 3.19%, in 7th place. Canada is at the bottom of a ranking where the top performers are the nations that live closest to Russia and feel the threat most acutely. Carney chose to make the announcement from Halifax at Canada's largest military base. That's the highest level of defense spending relative to the size of our economy since the fall of the Berlin Wall, he said. It was a victory lap, deliberate, choreographed, and aimed at multiple audiences simultaneously. At home, it validates his campaign promise. At NATO, it restores credibility after years of embarrassment. And at Washington, it removes Trump's most reliable line of attack against Canada. Trump has spent years accusing Canada of freeloading off American defense spending. As of Thursday, that accusation has no foundation. Canada is in the club. The bill is paid. Defense Minister David McGuinty was even more direct about the significance. Speaking to reporters in Halifax after Carney's announcement, McGuinty didn't dwell on the last place ranking. He focused on the trajectory. We're just starting. We're inside the club, we're inside the tent, we've got the credibility, people all over the world know that we're moving forward, we're seriously investing, we're putting our money where our mouths are. That framing, inside the tent, is deliberate. It positions Canada not as a country that barely scraped through, but as a country that has rejoined the alliance's core commitment and is accelerating from there. Subscribe right now because what I'm about to show you is what Canada is actually spending that money on, and why the scale of the commitment goes far beyond hitting a percentage target. The Carney government has not just pledged to hit 2% and stop there. It has committed to tens of billions in major new military hardware, a new fleet of submarines, a new class of Navy destroyers, dozens of new fighter jets. These are not incremental upgrades. They are generational investments in Canadian military capability that will take years to procure and decades to operate. Canada has also announced a defense industrial strategy that the government claims will add 125,000 new jobs and generate $500 billion in new investment in the defense sector by 2035. Whether those numbers fully materialize is a question for future audits, but the direction is unambiguous. Canada is militarizing at a pace it has not sustained since the Cold War. The Arctic is where the strategic stakes are highest. Canada is bolstering its civilian and military footprint across the Arctic to counter Russian and Chinese incursions, a mission that has taken on new urgency as both powers increase their activity in the high north. The Arctic is not just Canadian sovereign territory. It is one of the most strategically significant regions on Earth as climate change opens new shipping routes and resource extraction opportunities. Canada's military presence there has historically been thin. The Carney government is changing that. And the $3 billion in new military-related spending announced Thursday in Canada's Atlantic region is part of that broader northern strategy. Trump has now moved the goalposts. Having spent years demanding allies hit 2%, he has since imposed a new target, 5% of GDP on defense by 2035. Carney's government says Canada will meet that target too. That commitment, if kept, would represent a transformation of Canadian defense spending, so dramatic it would be almost unrecognizable compared to the Canada of 5 years ago. It would also represent a direct response to Trump's pressure campaign, proof that the browbeating, whatever its diplomatic costs, produced real results. But there is a deeper irony embedded in this moment. Trump's pressure on NATO allies to spend more has worked. Poland is at 4.3%, Lithuania is at 4.0%, Denmark is outspending America. Canada has finally hit 2% after 12 years of failure. The alliance is better funded than it has been in decades. And yet the man whose pressure produced these results is simultaneously threatening to leave the alliance, undermining its cohesion, and forcing allies to build alternative security frameworks precisely because they cannot trust American reliability. Trump may have made NATO's members stronger. He has not made NATO itself more united. The Ukraine dimension adds another layer of complexity to Thursday's announcement. McGuinty confirmed that Canada's commitment to Ukraine remains unchanged. Canada announced a $200 million contribution to the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List program in December, and McGuinty said Thursday that resolve is not wavering. Our resolve and our commitment to support Ukraine remains unchanged. That statement carries weight in the current context because reports have emerged that the United States may divert some of its Ukrainian military aid toward the Middle East. If Washington pivots, Canada and European allies will face pressure to fill the gap. McGuinty addressed that directly. If the Americans have decided to pivot and they want to make investments in the Middle East, that's their sovereign choice. But the rest of us in NATO and the United States are still involved. We're definitely aligned with Ukraine. Lithuania's Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Audra Plapait, was more pointed in her concern. Speaking on the margins of a major Canadian defense conference in Ottawa earlier this month, she warned that support for the Pearl program is already slowing. We see that all the European partners, transatlantic partners, including Canada, would contribute to the Pearl initiative. It started well, now we see it slowing down. Her message was blunt. Knowing Russia for centuries, Lithuania understands that the only deterrence that works is military preparedness. Canada's commitment is noted. The question is whether it is enough to compensate for any American retreat. Scenario 1. Canada's defense spending trajectory continues at pace. The submarine fleet, destroyers, and fighter jets are procured on schedule. Canada's Arctic military presence expands significantly over the next 5 years. By 2030, Canada has moved from the bottom of the NATO rankings toward the middle of the pack. The defense industrial strategy delivers on a significant portion of its job creation and investment targets. Canada's credibility within NATO is fully restored, and its voice on alliance strategy carries genuine weight. Trump's 5% target becomes the new North Star for Canadian defense planning, regardless of who occupies the White House. Scenario 2. The hardware commitments run into the procurement delays that have plagued Canadian defense acquisitions for decades. The submarines take longer to order than projected. The fighter jet program faces cost overruns. The Arctic buildup proceeds but more slowly than announced. Canada stays at or near 2% rather than climbing toward the 5% target. The credibility gain from Thursday's announcement erodes as allies watch Ottawa struggle to convert spending pledges into deployed capability. Canada remains inside the tent, but closer to the entrance than the center. Scenario 3. Trump's 5% demand fractures NATO before Canada can demonstrate sustained commitment. Several European allies balk at the new target as economically unsustainable. The alliance splits between high spenders and countries unwilling to hit 5%. Canada, having just reached 2%, finds itself caught between a U.S. demanding more and European allies resisting. The Ukraine situation deteriorates as American support wavers. NATO's coherence frays. Canada's military buildup continues domestically, but the alliance framework it was designed to strengthen weakens around it. Trump browbeat NATO's allies for years. Canada was his favorite example of freeloading. Thursday, Canada closed that chapter, hitting 2% for the first time in 12 years, from the bottom of the rankings but inside the target. Carney took his victory lap. The hardware is ordered, the Arctic strategy is moving, and Canada has committed to Trump's new 5% target too. Watch whether Canada's procurement timelines hold, watch whether American support for Ukraine wavers and Canada steps into the gap, and watch whether Trump acknowledges what his pressure campaign actually produced, a NATO where every single member is finally paying its share. Subscribe to Flashpoint and hit the bell, because in this world, the next move never waits.